The first winter I slept in the garage. My mother told me it was temporary. That word matters. Temporary. Families use that word the way banks use grace periods and governments use transitional. It means the suffering is already approved. It just hasn't been given a long enough timeline to sound permanent yet. I was 13. The garage smelled like cold concrete, paint thinner, wet cardboard, and the mildew that gathers in places a family uses for storage, but not for dignity. There was a narrow folding cot against the back wall, an old standing lamp with a crooked shade, a space heater that clicked like it was thinking about dying every 20 minutes, and through the thin side door that led into the laundry room, I could hear the rest of the house breathing like I had not been fully exiled. Plates, television, my brother laughing, my sister walking down the hallway to a bedroom that had an actual door, actual carpet, actual heat, and walls painted a soft cream my mother had chosen from a sample card while calling the house a fresh start. My name is Avery Collins. The people inside that warm, carefully arranged house in Raleigh, North Carolina were my family. My father, Daniel, believed hardship built character most effectively when it happened to someone else. My mother, Marjorie, specialized in turning cruelty into household management. My older brother, Evan, was the son the family narrated as promising before he had ever proven much. My younger sister, Chloe, was the delicate one, the one with allergies, piano recitals, and the kind of fragile prettiness that makes adults unconsciously hand a child better blankets and second helpings. And me? I was the practical daughter, the sturdy one, the one who could manage. That became the family excuse for almost everything. If this story reaches into something old in you, subscribe now. Some children are not thrown away all at once. They are just moved, quietly and repeatedly, to whatever space is left after everyone else's comfort has been assigned. The garage happened the year my father decided we needed more room. That was his version. More room. Not more love. Not more money. Not even more family. Just more room. We had lived in a smaller ranch house until I was 12. 3 bedrooms. 1 bathroom. Tight but manageable. Evan had his own room because my father believed boys needed privacy to become men. Chloe shared with me because she was younger and because daughters. Apparently. I could be folded together like towels if necessary. When my father's regional sales job improved, and my mother started talking more aggressively about presentation, district lines, and what kind of a dress matched where this family is headed, we moved into a larger house in a newer subdivision with identical mailboxes, young maples, and neighbors who measured one another's lives by countertops and vehicles. The new house had 4 bedrooms. That should have solved everything. It didn't. Because room inside a family is never only about square footage. It is about rank. My parents took the primary bedroom. Of course. Evan got the second largest room because he was 15 and needed space to study. Chloe got the back bedroom with the dormer window because my mother said the natural light would be good for her complexion, and because, by then, Chloe had already become the sort of girl women in our orbit liked to imagine blooming beautifully in curated environments. That left the small 4th bedroom. Mine. I thought. That would have made sense. But sense rarely wins against preference in families built on hierarchy. My mother stood in the doorway one afternoon, while movers were still bringing in dining chairs wrapped in brown paper, and said, "We're turning this one into a guest room and office for now." I remember blinking. "Then where am I sleeping?" She said it very casually. "As a temporary solution, your father cleared out the garage side room." Garage side room. That's what she called it. As if language could drywall over the truth. It was not a room. It was a partitioned storage area with unfinished walls and a side vent that rattled whenever the heat came on in the main house. No closet. No insulation worth naming. No real ceiling finish in one corner. Just exposed beams. Cold floor. And the faint mechanical hum of the garage door every time someone came or went. I said, "But there are 4 bedrooms." My mother kept smoothing the bedspread on the guest bed as if we were discussing a vase. "Yes. And one of them has to stay functional for the family." Functional for the family. That sentence sat in me for years. As if I was outside the category. As if the house had room for family and then, separately, room for me if weather permitted. I looked at my father. He was standing in the hallway holding a toolbox. He did not look ashamed. That part is important. A great many parental cruelties survive because they do not feel cruel to the people distributing them. He said, "It's only until we figure some things out." Again. Temporary. Until. Figure some things out. The family dialect of delayed injustice. The first night, I lay on that narrow cot under a scratchy blanket my mother said I could use for a little while and watched headlights sweep through the garage door seams every time a car passed outside. The cold pressed upward through the metal frame. Somewhere in the house, Chloe was laughing at something on television. Evan opened and shut his bedroom drawers. My parents were talking in the kitchen. The whole house sounded like belonging was happening one wall away. That is one of the strangest forms of loneliness. Not being left in silence. Being left close enough to hear your absence from the arrangement. People imagine family favoritism as obvious. A spoiled child. A cruelle comparaison. A father praising one sibling while mocking another. Sometimes it is that clean. In my house, it was more architectural. Evan got what he needed. Chloe got what she responded best to. I got what could be justified by my supposed toughness. If Chloe disliked a food, my mother said she had a sensitive stomach. If I disliked a food, I was told not to be difficult. If Evan forgot a school project, my father called him overextended. If I forgot anything, it became evidence that I should be more organized. If Chloe cried, my mother softened. If I cried, my father said, "Don't make this dramatic." Over time, these small assignments harden. One child becomes worth protecting. Another becomes expected to absorb. The garage was not the beginning. It was just the first time the family system became visible enough to photograph. My mother made small gestures so she could continue thinking of herself as fair. A second lamp from the den nobody used anymore. A braided rug from the old house. A promise that we'd fix it before winter got too bad. My father installed a hook near the door so I could hang my school coat. He pointed to it like he had added dignity to the room with a drill. "See," he said, "you've got your own setup." My own setup. A child hears a sentence like that and starts understanding how adults protect themselves from their own reflection. At school, I said nothing. What was I supposed to say? That I slept in the garage because my family had enough rooms but not enough intention? Children know when the truth will sound too strange to outsiders. So they edit. I told friends I had a separate space because my house was being rearranged. I said it lightly, as if I were lucky. A private area. More independence. That is another thing. Neglected children learn early how to narrate humiliation as uniqueness before anyone else can smell the wound. The cold became sharp by November. North Carolina winter is not the same as farther north. But concrete remembers temperature differently than carpet does. By morning, my hands hurt. The space heater dried my throat and made the room smell like dust warming too fast. I learned to dress in layers before bed. Socks under socks. A sweatshirt over pajamas. Sometimes gloves. I would wake at 3 or 4 in the morning, hearing rain tap the metal garage door, and wonder whether bedrooms sounded like that too. Evan never noticed. That was his gift in life. Not cruelty exactly. A kind of self-centered ease. He moved through the house as if comfort were climate, not distribution. By high school, he had become the axis of my father's imagination. Football in the fall. Student government in the spring. Not brilliant, but well received. Good jawline. Easy grin. Teachers who described him as leadership material because boys who speak confidently in clean polo shirts are often mistaken for future substance. My father loved taking him to games. Lifting weights with him in the garage, I slept beside. And speaking about college as if the family were preparing a national candidate. Chloe, meanwhile, had softness weaponized on her behalf. She had migraines, seasonal allergies, performance anxiety before piano recitals. Need. Always need. Need reorganizes families faster than fairness ever will. My mother liked being needed by Chloe. It let her perform devotion elegantly. A hand on the forehead. A tray of crackers. A quiet voice outside a bedroom door. I watched those gestures the way poor children watch bakery windows. Not because I believed I deserved constant gentleness. Because I could see clearly that tenderness was available in our house. It was just not routed toward me. I tried. At first, to solve the garage the way practical daughters solve everything. I made myself smaller, more useful, more agreeable. I cleaned without being asked. Loaded the dishwasher. Helped Chloe memorize piano scales. Ironed Evan's church shirt once before Easter when my mother was overwhelmed with hosting. I thought, foolishly, that excellence might convert into reinstatement. That if I became undeniably easy, the family would no longer need to exile me for convenience. That is the trap for children like me. We confuse usefulness with leverage. They are not the same thing. By 14, I had learned how to keep myself warm enough to function. I rolled towels along the bottom of the side door to stop drafts. Taped a plastic weather sheet over one unfinished window panel. Stacked books under one corner of the cot where the frame dipped. I turned the garage into something survivable. My mother interpreted that as proof the arrangement was working. One Saturday morning, she brought me a mug of instant cocoa and stood near the doorway, looking around like a homeowner assessing a rental. "This doesn't look bad at all now," she said. I remember staring at her. The concrete floor under my socks, the exposed shelf full of old paint cans behind her shoulder, the washing machine humming through the inner wall, and realizing, with the first true bitterness of adolescence, that once a child adapts to injustice, many parents reinterpret adaptation as consent. When I was 15, My best friend Mila found out. Not because I told her. Because one Friday night she came over unexpectedly with a history project we were supposed to finish before Monday. I had forgotten she hadn't been to the new house yet. My mother opened the front door in pearl earrings and weekend lipstick, smiled too brightly, and said, "Avery's in her space." Her space. Mila followed me down the side hall, through the laundry room, and then stopped when I opened the narrow door. She didn't say anything for a second. That silence cut deeper than pity would have. Then she asked, quietly, "You sleep here?" I shrugged. Sort of. Mila looked around at the cot, the shelves, the plastic bins, the little desk lamp clipped onto a metal cabinet. Then she looked at me. And for the first time in my life, I saw my family arrangement through an outsider's face. Not quirky. Not temporary. Not practical. Wrong. She did the kindest thing possible. She didn't overreact. She just carried the project board inside, sat on the rug, and acted like the room deserved normal conversation. Later that night, after she went home, I cried harder than I had in months. Not because I felt ashamed, because being seen accurately breaks something open. After that, I started spending more time at the public library, officially for homework. Actually, because the library was heated, quiet, and nobody had assigned me a rank there. I liked the hum of the fluorescent lights, the smell of paper, carpet, and radiator heat, the way all the tables belonged equally to whoever sat down first. I started staying until closing. Homework done early, then extra reading, then sketching floor plans, then flipping through magazines about interiors, construction, renovation, and residential design. That part surprises people when I tell it. They assume my later career began with ambition. It didn't. It began with longing. I became fascinated by houses because I understood, in my body, what space does to a person. A room can tell you whether you matter before anyone speaks. A doorway can rank you. A window can dignify you. Insulation can become love if you have gone long enough without it. At first, I just liked the images. Kitchens that felt warm, bedrooms with thick duvets, mudrooms with order, reading nooks under sloped ceilings. Then I started noticing plans, load-bearing walls, traffic flow, light, storage, scale. How some homes felt generous, not because they were expensive, but because someone had imagined the people inside them as worth accommodating. That thought changed me. I did not yet know what career it would become. I only knew I was drawn toward environments that repaired something my own house had fractured. My guidance counselor, Mrs. DeSantis, noticed before anyone else. She was one of those women who wore linen even in winter, drank bitter coffee from a ceramic mug, and never confused quietness with lack of thought. One afternoon during junior year, she found me in the library annex surrounded by books on architectural drafting, residential design programs, and community planning. She asked, "What are you building in your head?" That question matters. Most adults ask children what they want to be. She asked what I was building. I told her, embarrassed, that I liked floor plans, that I liked the logic of them, that I kept rearranging rooms in my notebook to make houses feel fairer than the one I lived in. I did not mean to say that last part aloud. But once it came out, I couldn't pull it back. She watched me for a second and said, very gently, "Then maybe you're not just interested in houses. Maybe you understand how people live inside decisions." That line stayed with me. People live inside decisions. Families. Builders. Planners. Parents. Everyone. By 17, I was taking a drafting elective through a shared technical program and loving it in the unglamorous, deep way that lasts longer than excitement. Measurements. Elevation sketches. Material logic. Space planning. The way a line on paper could become livable comfort if enough people respected it correctly. My father dismissed it immediately. When I said I was considering architecture, construction management, or residential development, he laughed the same way some men laugh at weather forecasts they don't like. You don't want to be hauling around job sites with a hard hat. I don't have to haul things to understand how houses get built. He waved a hand. That world is rough. Long hours. Contractors. Men who talk like men. You'd hate it. That sentence told me more about my father than about any profession. He thought difficulty was inherently masculine and therefore unsuitable for me. The irony, of course, was that I had already survived more bodily discomfort in a family-owned garage than he had tolerated in most offices his whole adult life. My mother preferred a different form of diminishment. She said design could be a lovely hobby. Hobby. Another female graveyard word. When college discussions began, Evan's future took over the house. Campus visits, application fees, suit fittings for interviews, a used SUV my father suddenly found room in the budget for because a young man needs reliable transportation. I watched all this from the edge of the kitchen while balancing my own scholarship forms, part-time job applications, and a growing certainty that nothing substantial was going to be funded for me. Chloe, by then, had become a ballet flat. Perfume sample, lip gloss teenager with excellent social instincts and the family's full emotional protection wrapped around her like silk. No one ever said I was unloved. That is what made it harder to explain. I was fed, driven to school, given Christmas presents, asked about grades. My parents would have been horrified by the word abusive. They would have said I was dramatic, ungrateful, too sensitive. What I was. In truth, I was structurally deprioritized. That does its damage slowly. Around senior year, the garage finally developed a leak near the back wall after a storm. Water crept under one shelf and soaked a box of old yearbooks, a folded camping chair, and the hem of the extra blanket I kept near the cot. I went into the kitchen holding the wet blanket and said, "The room is leaking." My father barely looked up from the paper. "Then move your stuff away from the wall." "My bed's against that wall." He sipped coffee. "So move the bed." That was his whole solution. Rearrange yourself around the problem. Do not ask the structure to change. I dragged the cot 3 feet over and spent the rest of that year sleeping, angled awkwardly between a toolbox cabinet and the side shelf. Even now, when people ask how I became so good at spatial problem solving, I sometimes think, because my body learned early that survival might depend on reading bad layouts faster than other people. The real break came during spring of senior year. I got into North Carolina State with partial scholarship and a pathway into construction management with residential development electives. It wasn't architecture school in the glamorous sense, but it was strong, practical, and connected to real industry work. I came home with the acceptance packet in my bag and waited until dinner. Because some animal part of a child still wants family recognition, even after years of evidence. My mother had roasted chicken. The kitchen smelled like thyme, butter, and floor cleaner. Evan was talking about fraternity rush. Chloe was upset about a recital dress. My father was checking sports scores between bites. I said, I got into state. No one reacted for a second. Then my mother said, That's nice. Sweetheart. Nice. Not congratulations. Not tell us more. Nice. I kept going. With scholarship money? That got my father's attention. He looked up. How much? I told him. He nodded once. More as if assessing whether the number reduced future inconvenience than celebrating merit. And what exactly are you planning to study again? Construction management. Residential development track. Evan laughed before he could stop himself. Not cruelly. Just automatically. As if my future had entered the table wearing a costume. My mother set down her fork. Oh, Avery. That tone. The tone women use before they convert your seriousness into something regrettable but not yet embarrassing. What? She smiled gently. Why would you choose something so hard-edged? I remember the silence after that. The hum of the refrigerator. The little tapping sound Chloe made with her ring against her water glass. My father said, You'd be better in something more stable for a woman. I asked, Like what? He shrugged. Interior sales. Real estate support. Office administration. Something adjacent. Adjacent. There it was again. The family had never objected to my talent. Only to its ownership. Only to any version of me standing at the center instead of beside it. I said, I don't want to be adjacent. Evan smirked. Chloe stared at her plate. My mother lowered her voice and said, You always pick the hardest possible version of life. That line almost made me laugh. Because she was the one who had put me in a freezing garage at 13 and now wanted to lecture me on avoidable discomfort. I got through freshman year, mostly on scholarship. Loans. And a campus job in the materials lab. No one from home asked many questions. Evan transferred once. Changed majors twice. And still remained the family's great funded experiment. Chloe enrolled at a private college 2 hours away because my mother wanted her in a more nurturing environment. That phrase alone tells you everything. There was always money for nurture. Just not for mine. I came home less and less. Not to punish them. Because distance improves signal. The farther I got from my family's house, the more obvious it became that I was not difficult. I was simply a person they had built too little room for. College was not easy. Construction labs. Drafting deadlines. Group projects with men who assumed I'd handle presentation boards while they spoke over the technical work. Internships that paid less than they should have and demanded more than was reasonable. I loved it anyway. Not every minute, but enough. Enough that even while eating microwave noodles in a studio apartment with thin walls and a shower that never got fully hot, I knew I was closer to myself there than I had ever been in that polished house in Raleigh. By 23, I was working for a regional residential builder that specialized in mid-range subdivisions and custom renovation packages. Not glamorous. Real. Permits. Site meetings. Budget calls. Timeline disasters. Framing delays. Clients who changed their minds after materials were ordered. I became good at reading a room and a blueprint with the same eye. Where pressure sat. Where ego sat. Where the hidden load-bearing point actually was. My boss, Celia Morton, was the first person in my life to trust my judgment without first requiring me to survive emotional hazing. She was 51, sharp as cut glass, wore steel-toe boots like a crown, and had the kind of quiet authority that makes weak men defensive before she has even spoken. She once stood beside me at a muddy lot while subcontractors were arguing over a delivery schedule and said, "You don't flinch when comfort is missing. That makes you dangerous in this business." Dangerous. Not sturdy. Not helpful. Not practical. Dangerous. I nearly cried in the truck afterward. Because naming changes a person. And for the first time in my adult life, someone had named the strength inside the wound correctly. Years passed the way adulthood often does. Not in one grand arc, but in invoices, weather delays, tax seasons, takeout containers, and quiet competence piling up until one day the life you built no longer resembles the one they assigned you. Evan got married too young to a woman my mother approved of because she came from the right suburb and owned good shoes. Then divorced expensively. Then bounced between jobs. My father kept helping him stabilize. Chloe married beautifully. Garden ceremony. String quartet. Hydrangeas everywhere. I attended. Of course. Wore a navy dress. Smiled for photographs. Listened to my mother tell strangers. Avery works in housing. Housing. As if she could not quite bring herself to say I built the thing she had once denied mattered. I bought my first townhouse at 29. Small. Brick front. 2 bedrooms. Sunlight in the kitchen every morning, around 8:30. The first night I slept there, I stood in the doorway of my own bedroom and cried. Not from drama. From temperature. From carpet. From a door that closed and belonged to me. By then, I had started my own firm with Celia as an early mentor and later investor. Not enormous. Focused. Residential design build with a specialty in high-function family homes and strategic renovations. That phrase sounds corporate. The truth underneath it was simpler. I built spaces that told people they mattered. Mudrooms where chaos had somewhere to go. Bedrooms with proper insulation. Windows where children could read. Small houses that felt fair. Larger homes that did not waste their generosity on performance. I got good clients because I was good at the work. And because women, especially, I could feel that I understood something male developers often didn't. Home is not only aspiration, it is nervous system architecture. That became my edge. By 32, I had employees. A project manager, 2 site coordinators, a draftsman who worshipped natural light, a bookkeeper who could smell billing errors before software caught them, a waiting list, real money, not billionaire money, not fantasy, adult, Undeniable success built from skill nobody in my family had ever intended to fund. And then, finally, time did what it always does. It brought my parents to the exact point in life where housing became vulnerable. My father called the first time as if he were discussing weather. Not asking. Not apologizing. Just introducing a problem into the room and assuming, as he always had, that I would reorganize myself around it. I was in my office, reviewing revised elevations for a narrow lot project when his name came across my phone. Daniel Collins. I almost let it ring out. Not from anger. From instinct. Children who grew up like I did never fully lose the small bodily flinch that comes with seeing a parent's name unexpectedly. I answered anyway. He cleared his throat. Avery. Dad. A pause. Then, your mother and I may need some advice. Advice. That word did a lot of work. Advice sounds cheap. Advice does not sound like the accumulated bill for 2 decades of hierarchy arriving quietly at the door. I leaned back in my chair and looked through the glass wall into the studio, where Maya was pinning samples to the material board, and my project manager was on speaker with a supplier arguing about lead times. What kind of advice? The house? That surprised me less than it should have. I had heard things through Chloe. Small comments. Water intrusion in the back wall. Foundation concerns. Deferred maintenance my father kept insisting was cosmetic until cosmetic became structural. As it always does when pride gets too involved in drywall. Our house? I asked. Yes? I let the silence sit. Not to punish him. To make him finish his own sentence. He did. We've had some evaluations done. Évaluation. Another household euphemism. Not damage. Not failure. Évaluation. And he exhaled. The estimates are worse than expected. There it was. Weather. Deferred care. Bad decisions. Everything eventually leaves a mark somewhere. On walls. En juin. On families. On houses. I asked what was wrong. He listed things in the clipped tone of a man trying to describe collapse as inconvenience. Moisture intrusion. Mold behind part of the downstairs wall. Electrical rewiring now recommended because the earlier patchwork no longer met current code. Subfloor issues in one section. A roof replacement that had shifted from should probably to must immediately. Then the line that mattered. And there may be a problem with the old garage conversion area. Garage conversion area. Even then, he could not quite say it cleanly. Not my room. Not the place your daughter slept. A conversion area. I stared at my desk. At the plans under my hand. At the pencil line showing a child's bedroom window in a house I was building for strangers with more decency than my parents had once shown their own child. What kind of problem? The inspector said some of the enclosure work was never done correctly. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because of course it wasn't. Of course, the structure built carelessly around my discomfort had been careless in more ways than one. Of course, the room where I had spent winters shivering in silence was now, on paper, officially, what it had always been in truth. Improvised. Unsafe. Underbuilt. I said, "So what do you need from me?" He hesitated. That was rare. Then, very stiffly, I thought you might know someone. Know someone. Again. Families like mine always start there. As if daughters who built real authority are still only useful as referral networks for male convenience. I said. I do. Another pause. Then he asked the real question. Could you come look at it yourself? I stood slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the lot across the street was being framed under bright autumn light. Workers moved through the skeleton of a house that would soon become bedrooms. Hallways. Heat. Belonging. I thought about 13-year-old me, rolling towels along the bottom of the side door to keep out the draft. Then I said, yes, I can look. My mother was at the house when I arrived. Of course she was. Marjorie always preferred difficult conversations on home ground, where furniture and routine could still be mistaken for moral authority. She opened the door wearing a cardigan I remembered from Christmas 2 years earlier, and a smile that landed somewhere between relief and performance. Avery, come in. The house smelled like lemon oil, old carpet, and the faint sourness of dampness trying not to be noticed. Time had altered the place in ways my memory had not. The entry tile looked smaller, the ceilings lower, the kitchen less impressive. That is another thing adulthood does. It reduces the scale of places that once contained your whole weather. My father was in the dining room with a stack of contractor estimates, legal pads, and the defensive posture of a man preparing to discuss numbers he resented needing help with. Chloe arrived 20 minutes later. She had divorced by then. 2 children. A careful blowout. The same family softness in the way she entered a room, though life had roughened it enough to make her kinder than she had once been. Evan never came. That also mattered. For years, he had been the funded son, the central investment, the reason there was no room. And now, when the house itself was failing, he was nowhere in the first room where reality got counted. I walked the property before I sat down. Roofline, drainage, foundation cracks, window seals, back wall moisture. Then the garage. My father opened it and stood aside. The smell hit first. Damp wood, dust, old paint, oil, a stale coldness that made my chest tighten before my mind caught up. The old partition wall was still there. Modified once. Badly. Then painted over. The cot was gone. Obviously. The shelf, too. But the proportions of the space remained. Too narrow. Too hard. Too makeshift. The concrete still carried that old temperature in it. I stood very still. My mother, behind me, said softly. It looks smaller than I remember. I turned and looked at her. That sentence nearly broke something in me. Because at last, without meaning to, she had said the one honest thing parents like mine almost never say. That yes, the room had been small. Too small. She remembered. She had always remembered. My father pointed to one corner where the enclosure met the original wall. The inspector says some of that wasn't done to spec. Wasn't done to spec. I crouched near the baseboard and touched the warped trim. The drywall had bubbled in one place from old moisture. I could see where shortcuts had been taken, where someone had enclosed space just enough to call it livable, if the child sleeping there didn't count as a person with equal claim to safety. I stood again and said, "This was never properly finished." Neither of them answered. So I kept going. There's inadequate insulation, bad ceiling, moisture ingress, electrical work that never should have passed if anyone looked closely. This shouldn't have been used as a bedroom. My father's face changed slightly. Not guilt yet. Something closer to irritation at being spoken to in a language facts had made non-negotiable. It was different then. That old sentence, that useless sentence, everything harmful was different then. As if chronology were morality. I said, "Code was not invented last year." My mother stepped in quickly. The way women like her always do when truth begins sounding too much like accusation. We did what we thought made sense at the time. There it was. Not we were wrong. Not we failed you. Made sense. I looked around the room again. At the ceiling line. At the corner where I used to keep my backpack off the damp floor during storms. Then I asked, very quietly, "To whom?" That question landed. My mother said nothing. My father looked away. We went back into the dining room. I reviewed the estimates one by one. Some were padded. Some were incomplete. One was laughably optimistic. The house needed more than repair. It needed a decision. Strip it back and reinvest heavily into a property already declining in long-term value for its age and layout. Or leave. Sell what could still be sold. Build or buy something smaller. Cleaner. More manageable. The problem was money. That is usually where old family myths start shaking. My father had retired earlier than he should have because pride ages faster than planning. My mother had continued living as if club memberships and tasteful dinners were not real line items. The market had shifted badly against what they assumed their house was still worth. Evan, I learned, was over-leveraged after the divorce. Chloe had 2 children and a careful, fragile financial peace she was not going to rupture to preserve our parents' image, which left the room in a very strange configuration. The daughter who had once been placed in the garage was now the only person at the table whose relationship to housing was not theoretical, emotional, or nostalgic. It was structural. It was professional. It was mine. My father asked, "What would you do?" Even now, that question moves me. Not because it was generous, because it was the first time in my memory he had asked me for judgment without wrapping the request in diminishment first. I answered honestly, "I wouldn't pour all of this into this house." My mother stiffened. "This is our home?" "Yes," I said, "and it's becoming an expensive memory." She hated that. I could see it. Because mothers like mine confuse house and identity more thoroughly than they mean to. To suggest the house could be let go was, to her, almost indecent. I went on. "If you stay, you'll keep chasing damage. Roof, mold, electrical, moisture, layout inefficiency. And even then, you still end up with a house built for a family structure that doesn't exist anymore." My father looked at the numbers again. "What are the alternatives?" I slid one estimate aside. "You downsize, or you build." My mother gave a small, incredulous laugh. "Build at our age?" I met her eyes. "Yes. At your age, people do not age out of wanting a safe place to live." That sentence quieted the room. We spent the next hour talking through possibilities. Smaller footprint. Single-level accessibility. Efficient heating. Real storage. One guest room. Study space. Natural light. No stairs necessary. Manageable maintenance. The practical language of late-life dignity. I expected resistance. There was some, but underneath it, I sensed something newer. Fear. Not of me. Of time. Of being outlived by deferred consequences. Of realizing they no longer had enough years left to keep worshiping the house they had used as family theater. At the end of the meeting, my father asked what a new build would cost. I told him a realistic range. My mother's face changed immediately. Because there it was. The simple truth. They could not comfortably afford what they now needed. Not without pain. Not without sacrifice. Not without meeting reality where it lived. I did not offer anything. Not then. That would have made the moment sentimental too early. And sentimentality is how families like mine escape clarity. I said I would sketch options if they wanted them. My father nodded. My mother thanked me too carefully. As I was leaving, I passed the laundry room door and glanced, just once, toward the narrow entrance to the garage. My mother followed my line of sight. Then she said my name. Just that. Avery. I turned. She looked older than I had let myself notice. Not weak, but thinned by time in a way that made performance harder to maintain at full power. She said, "We didn't think of it the way you do." That was the closest thing to an apology she could survive in one sentence. And because adulthood is cruelly better at complexity than childhood, I knew two things at once. It was inadequate. And it was probably true. They had not thought of it the way I did, because they had never had to live inside the decision. People who assign the smallest room rarely experience its winter. I said, "I know." Then I left. That night, I didn't sleep well. Not from fury. From memory. I kept thinking of concrete cold through thin socks. The hum of the heater. The side door draft. The way rain used to sound on the garage roof. Trauma is an overused word now. But certain environments do stay in the body like unfinished math. I woke before dawn and made coffee in my quiet kitchen. Then I opened a blank file and started sketching. At first, I told myself it was professional discipline, an exercise, a concept study. Then, somewhere between the mudroom placement and the bedroom wing, I understood I was doing something more dangerous. I was designing the house my parents actually needed, not the one their pride wanted, not the one their old social rank could still pose inside, the one their age, budget, health, and shrinking life required. Single level, 3 bedrooms, but scaled honestly. Primary suite with accessible bath. 1 guest room. 1 flex room that could be office or caregiver space. Wide thresholds. Warm materials. Deep insulation. Strong natural light in the morning. Covered entry. Storage designed for actual use. Not decorative fantasy. And no room. Anywhere. That could be turned into a child's exile and still be called practical. That detail was not on the plan. It lived underneath it. I did not show them the first version. Or the second. I let the design sit for a week while my rational mind argued with the older, wounded parts of me. Why help them? Why build safety for the people who had once denied it to you? Why convert skill into grace where memory still hurt? But revenge, I have learned, is not always the destruction of what harmed you. Sometimes it is far more unsettling than that. Sometimes it is making reality so undeniable, so well built, so structurally complete, that everyone involved has to stand inside it, without excuses. I called Chloe first. Not because she had earned first notice. Because she, unlike Evan, had at least grown into someone capable of seeing a room after years of floating comfortably through it. We met for coffee at a place near her kids' school. She arrived tired. Nicer than she used to be. Motherhood had done to her what long winters do to soil. Broken the surface open enough for other things to grow. I told her the house was worse than our parents had admitted. She nodded. I figured. Then I said I was considering building them something smaller. Her eyes widened. You? Yes. She sat back and stared at me. That's generous. I almost laughed. No, it's precisely. That made her smile. Though sadly, we talked for almost an hour. About money? About our parents. About what everyone had become. At one point, she looked out the cafe window and said, I don't think I understood how bad it was for you back then. There are sentences you think you want all your life. Then, when they arrive, they sound smaller than the years they are meant to cover. I stirred my coffee and asked, which part? She looked ashamed. The garage? I said nothing. She continued. I was a kid. I knew it was strange. I knew it wasn't fair. But I also knew if I said much, Mom would turn it into me being sensitive, and Dad would get irritated. And she swallowed. I let it become normal. That was honest. Maybe the first fully honest thing Chloe had ever said to me about our childhood. I appreciated it more than performance remorse. I know. I said. She looked at me carefully. Are you doing this for them? That question sat between us. I answered just as carefully. I'm doing it because I know how to build the right thing. And because I refuse to let the last word in this family be the one they wrote when I was 13. Chloe exhaled slowly. Then she said, if you do it, they won't know how to hold it. That, I suspected, was true. My father came to my office the next week. Alone. That mattered. Men like him do not willingly enter daughters' professional domains unless reality has already stripped away some of the old script. He wore a navy jacket, carried the folder of estimates, and looked around my studio in the restrained way older men do when they are trying not to register respect too visibly. Material boards, drafting table, glass office, framed site photos, employees moving with purposeful distraction, the visible infrastructure of competence. I led him into the conference room and laid the preliminary concept in front of him. He studied it quietly. The longer he looked, the more his face changed. Not because the design was flashy. It wasn't. It was clean, efficient, dignified. The kind of plan that makes aging look like a stage of life instead of a punishment. He pointed at the guest room. Why 2 secondary rooms? 1 guest room, 1 flex room, future care needs, visiting grandchildren, medical equipment if necessary, or office space. He nodded, then pointed to the mudroom. Do we need all this built-in storage? Yes. He looked at me. I held his gaze. He did not argue. That was new too. We talked numbers, land options, sale sequencing, financing. At last he asked, very carefully, would you be willing to take this on? Again, not as referral, not know someone. This. I said yes. Then he asked the real question beneath the practical one. Why? There it was. No parent should have to ask that from a daughter they once treated as expandable. But some do. And maybe hearing the answer is part of the cost. I folded my hands and told the truth. Because I can do it well. He waited. I added, and because good structure matters. Whether the people inside it understood that in time or not. He looked down at the plans. A long silence passed. Then he said, almost too quietly to hear, we were harder on you than we should have been. That sentence did not heal me. Nothing that short could, but it entered the record. And sometimes that matters almost as much. The next few months were a blur of practical upheaval. Market analysis. Lot search. Appraisal. Pre-list repairs on the old house, just enough to stabilize sale value. Budget compression. Selections. Site orientation. Timeline coordination. The old familiar work of making a future possible, while older people still grieved the fiction they had mistaken for permanence. My mother resisted almost every stage emotionally. Not openly. Tastefully. She mourned the old staircase, the formal dining room, the old hydrangea bed, the neighborhood identity, the way we have always hosted Christmas. I let her mourn. Not because she was right, because transition is still transition even when it is overdue. But where she wanted sentiment to drive decisions, I kept returning to fact. Maintenance. Heating cost. Mobility. Moisture risk. Light. Storage. Accessibility. Longevity. This was my domain. And, for the first time in our lives, her aesthetic language did not outrank my structural one. That became its own form of reversal. Not loud, not theatrical, just steady. She would say, but the breakfast nook in the old house has so much charm. And I would answer, charm does not prevent mold. Or she would say, I've always wanted a statement foyer. And I would say, a statement foyer is not as useful as a zero threshold entry. No rage, no raised voice, just reality. My reality. Finally central. Evan surfaced only when sale discussions began. Of course he did. Money and optics always draw men like him back toward family gravity. He came to one meeting in a golf quarter zip, and the same well-received confidence. Life had always rewarded in him half an hour before evidence. He sat at my conference table, glanced around the studio, and said, "You've really built a whole operation here." That sentence should have been complimentary. Instead, It landed like anthropological surprise, as if competence in me was still exotic. I said, "Yes." He nodded once, and then began offering opinions about resale strategy, low placement, and whether our parents really needed custom cabinetry. 10 minutes in, I realized he had entered the room assuming old sibling rank still transferred into new terrain. It did not. He suggested cutting the flex room. I said no. He suggested downsizing the primary bath further. I said no. He said, "I'm just trying to keep this realistic." That word again. Realistic. The family weapon of choice against my judgment whenever my judgment threatened to become decisive. I looked at him and said, "Realistic is what you call my decisions when they turn out to be the only ones based on actual use." The room went very quiet. My father stared at the table. My mother froze. Evan gave a short laugh, waiting for someone to translate the moment back into sibling banter. No one did. Because for once, the paperwork, the expertise, the cost sheets, the plans, and the room itself all belonged more to me than to him. He did not stay long after that. He signed what was needed later. From a distance, exactly where funded sons often end up when family myth finally collides with practical adulthood. The old house sold in early spring. Less than my parents had once imagined. More than the worst-case estimates. Enough to move the plan from theory into sequence. I attended the closing because I needed documents, signature, and transfer timing. My mother cried in the parking lot afterward. My father stood with one hand in his jacket pocket, looking not devastated. Exactly. But unmoored. There are moments when parents finally understand that a house was never only a house. It was proof of the version of family they wanted the world to see. And once it is gone, they are left with the people themselves. No architecture. No district prestige. No carefully assigned rooms. Just the truth of what they built and what they failed to. Construction began 6 weeks later. I visited the site almost daily in the early phase. Grading. Footings. Framing. Sheathing. Windows. The usual choreography of wood. Timing. Weather. And human error trying to become shelter. I should tell you this plainly. Building their house did not feel noble. It felt complicated. Some mornings I stood at the slab and remembered my cot in the garage. Some afternoons I walked the framed hallway and thought, this is what you could have done then. This is what simple fairness always looked like in material form. Other days I felt almost peaceful. Not forgiving. Not vindictive. Just exact. Because houses do not lie. A hallway is wide enough or it isn't. A bedroom has heat or it doesn't. A door closes properly or it doesn't. Structure is less interested in family revision than memory is. My mother came to the site for the first framing walk. She wore sensible flats she should not have worn on packed dirt and kept touching unfinished walls as if they were already painted. At one point, she stood in the secondary bedroom and asked, "Whose room is this meant to feel like?" I knew what she meant. Guest room. Grandchild room. Future caregiver room. The room that, in another family, might once have been given differently. I answered, "Whoever needs it." She looked at me for a long second, then nodded. No defense. No clever phrasing. Just a nod. That may sound small. It wasn't. The near-final confrontation came 3 weeks before completion. During a dinner at their rental. Nothing glamorous. Takeout containers. Paint samples. Selection sheets. The kind of practical family evening people like mine once believed they were too polished to need. We were reviewing finishing items when my mother, exhausted and off balance, said, "I still sometimes think we should have just tried to save the old house." I answered automatically, "You couldn't," she said, with more edge. "Not everyone wants their whole life reduced to efficiency." I looked at her, then at my father, then at the plans spread across the table. And maybe it was the fatigue. Maybe it was the smell of drywall dust still on my jacket from site visits. Maybe it was simply that some truths wait years for the right ordinary evening. But I finally said it. "You gave your son a bedroom because you thought his comfort was an investment." Silence. Chloe lowered her eyes. My father went still. I kept going. "You gave your younger daughter a bedroom because she was easier to imagine protecting. And you put me in the garage because I was the one you believed could absorb the cost of your convenience without changing the story you told yourselves about being good parents." No one interrupted. So I finished. "And now I'm the one building the house you actually need because I learned from that room what space does to a person. So yes, I reduce houses to efficiency sometimes. Because efficiency is what keeps a home from turning into hierarchy with drywall." You could hear the refrigerator humming in the next room. My mother's face had gone pale. My father looked older than I had ever seen him. At last he said, "You think we didn't love you?" That question surprised me, because it was both too late and more vulnerable than he had ever sounded. I answered carefully, "No, I think you loved me inside a system that always asked me to take less and call it maturity." My mother began to cry. Not neatly, not strategically, quietly. That shook me more than shouting would have. She said, "We thought you were stronger." I looked at her for a long time, then said the only true thing available. I shouldn't have had to be." That was the sentence. The one everything had been walking toward. Not a revenge speech. Not triumph. Truth. Simple enough to survive memory. I shouldn't have had to be. No one said much after that. We finished the selection meeting. Closed folders. Cleared containers. Life, brutally, continued. But the architecture had changed. They could never again pretend the garage had been quirky. Temporary. Practical. Not after that sentence. The house finished in October. Soft gray siding. Warm wood front door. Deep porch. Strong insulation. Morning light in the kitchen. A study that could become whatever late life required. A guest room with proper heat. Closets that made sense. Bathrooms designed for aging without humiliation. Nothing extravagant. Everything intentional. The day I handed them the keys, the sky was high and blue and indecently beautiful, in the way important days sometimes are. My mother stood on the porch with both hands around the key packet as if it were fragile. My father looked out across the yard in stunned silence. Chloe had brought her kids. Evan came late. Of course. He stepped out of his car, glanced at the facade, and whistled softly like a man arriving to admire an outcome whose labor he had not touched. I walked them through the house slowly. Entry. Kitchen. Hallway. Primary suite. Guest room. Study. Mudroom. Porch access. Everything in its place. At the guest room doorway, my mother stopped. She stood there longer than the others, looking at the bed, the window, the quilt folded at the foot, the lamp on the nightstand. Then she said, barely above a whisper, "It's warm." That word moved through me like an old door opening. Warm. Such a small requirement. Such a complete indictment. My father, from behind us, said, "It's more house than we deserve." No one answered him, because sometimes the most powerful thing a family can do after truth is let it remain unsoftened. Later, after everyone had drifted toward the kitchen and porch, and children were already claiming corners of the yard as if belonging were the most natural thing in the world, I stepped into the study alone. Smaller than a bedroom. Larger than the garage had ever been. Light across the floor. A real vent, humming warm air into the room. A door that shut properly. I stood there with my hand on the knob and let the years line up quietly behind me. 13. Cold concrete. Scratchy blanket. Temporary. 17. Scholarship packet at the dinner table. Adjacent. More stable for a woman. 29. My first house. A bedroom door that belonged to me. 34. A full set of keys in my hand. My parents inside a home I had designed for their dignity more carefully than they had once arranged mine. This is the part where some people expect forgiveness. A dramatic embrace. A speech about family finding its way back to love. Life is usually less theatrical than that. What happened instead was better. Harder. Cleaner. My parents grew older inside a house that denied them every excuse they had once used against me. No wasted rooms. No convenient exile spaces. No way to confuse practicality with hierarchy again without feeling the design push back. We did not become a sentimental family. My mother never turned into a different woman overnight. My father never gained the language for full repair. Evan remained Evan. Chloe became kinder. The grandchildren changed the air in the rooms. Time softened some edges and clarified others. But the story did change. Because from then on, whenever anyone in the family spoke about the house, they had to say my name correctly. Not helpful. Not practical. Not adjacent. Built by Avery. Designed by Avery. Avery thought of that. Avery made sure. That became the new family grammar. And I will tell you something honest. It was enough. Not because it erased the garage. Nothing does. But because vindication is not always hearing people confess the full size of what they did, sometimes it is forcing reality to reorganize around the truth they spent years minimizing. I did not build them a mansion they couldn't afford. I built them a home they had to live inside carefully enough to understand, at last, what careful building actually is. Warmth, fairness, intention, structure, space that does not ask one child to shrink so everyone else can feel comfortably arranged. That was the real reversal. Not that I succeeded. Not even that they needed me. It was this. The daughter they treated as the easiest to deprive became the woman most qualified to define what dignity looked like in square footage. in budget, in aga, in truth. And if there is justice in that, it is not loud. It is not revenge in the movie sense. It is quieter. A key turning. A vent humming warm air into a room. A mother standing in a guest bedroom whispering. It's warm. And all of them, whether they said it fully or not, finally living inside the cost of what they once called temporary. If this story found something real in you, stay with the channel. There are some wounds that do not close when the past apologizes. They close when the truth gets built so solidly into the future that no one can rearrange you around their convenience ever again.